Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back for this evening's keynote conversation on our responsibility in Catholic higher education. My name is Carter Sneed, and I'm the director of the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture and also professor of law here at the University of Notre Dame. The DeNicola Center, as I mentioned last night, is dedicated to sharing the richness of the Catholic moral and intellectual tradition, both here at Notre Dame and in the public square as Notre Dame. I'm particularly thrilled about tonight's panel, as we have with us four outstanding advocates for the Catholic intellectual tradition, all of whom are exemplary scholars and administrators in their own right, and I'm pleased to say four people who I'm honored to call colleagues and friends. It's such a gift to the university to have Marcus and Sarah as our deans. What's more, the DeNicola Center in particular owes much to the long friendship and support of President Tom Hibbs. I'm delighted they could all take time from their busy schedules to be with us here this evening. To moderate tonight's conversation is my dear friend, Anna Bonta Moreland, Associate Professor of Theology in the Department of Humanities and Director of the Honors Program at Villanova University. Anna is also a past Miser Visiting Fellow at the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture. Her areas of research include faith and reason, medieval theology with an emphasis on Thomas Aquinas, the theology of religious pluralism, and comparative theology. In the humanities program at Villanova, Professor Moreland regularly teaches courses in theology, interreligious dialogue, and on shaping an adult life, and on the rise of modern atheism. Her most recent book is Muhammad Reconsidered, A Christian Perspective on Islamic Prophecy, published here in 2020 by the University of Notre Dame Press, led by the wonderful director, Stephen Wren. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Anna.
Thank you, Carter. I'm delighted to moderate this evening's panel. I want to acknowledge, though, that we are missing having just had dinner at the Morris Inn, walking over to McKenna Hall, being in the McKenna Hall auditorium. So we're going to do the best we can. The only comfort is that you could be in your slippers, and that's terrific. The comfort to me is that Carter has his signature scarf. So that's a token of continuity from our in-person ethics and culture conferences to this year, and looking forward to next year as well. I am thrilled to be moderating the conversation this evening. Before I do, though, I just want to mention that you can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen at any time to submit a question to the moderator. Those questions are going to magically appear on my end, and I will be able to vocalize those questions for you. We're going to have a brief conversation, and then we'd like to include you in the conversation so that you can ask your questions, and our three distinguished administrators can take a crack at answering them, and we'll solve the world's problems this evening. So I'm going to introduce our three panelists in due order right now. Dean Cole. Dean Marcus Cole is the Joseph A. Matson Dean and Professor of Law at Notre Dame Law School, where he was appointed in 2019. A leading scholar of empirical law and economics of commerce and finance, he came to Notre Dame from Stanford Law School, where he held 2 endowed chairs and served on the faculty from 1997 to 2019. His extensive legal and scholarly background includes serving as a national fellow at the Hoover Institution, a fellow at the University of Amsterdam Center for Law and Economics, and a visiting professor at several institutions around the world, including the University of Amsterdam, the University of Vienna, Leiden University, Northwestern University, Korea University, and Peking University School of Transnational Law in Shenzhen, China. But now he calls South Bend home. Professor Thomas Hibbs was appointed the 9th president of the University of Dallas in 2019. He previously served as the inaugural dean of the Honors College and distinguished professor of ethics and culture at Baylor University, where he taught for 16 years, and before that as professor and chair of the philosophy department at Boston College. Hibbs received his PhD in medieval studies at the University of Notre Dame and is the author of 3 books on the thought of Thomas Aquinas: as well as author or editor of 9 other books and countless academic and popular articles. We're delighted that President Hibbs was able to join us this evening. And lastly, Dean Sarah Mastillo is the I.A. O'Shaughnessy Dean of the College of Arts and Letters and Professor of Sociology at the University of Notre Dame. An expert in the social causes of childhood mental illness and statistical methods used in social science research, Mastillo joined the Notre Dame faculty in 2014 after serving 7 years as a professor of sociology at Purdue University and 6 years on the faculty at Duke University School of Medicine. She was chair of Notre Dame's Department of Sociology from 2016 to 2018. She is co-editor of the American Sociological Review, the author of more than 50 peer-reviewed journal articles, and a frequent speaker at domestic and international conferences on topics ranging from child mental health and wellness to advanced statistical methods. Dean Mastillo is going to take the lead this evening. All of the 3 panelists have had a chance to look over some questions that I sent to them previous to our conversation this evening. They've each selected one. The method of procedure for the first part of our conversation is Dean Mastillo will choose a question, make some comments about it, and then Dean Cole and President Hibbs will comment upon the question as well. And then we'll just take it from there and just see how it goes. So I turn the baton over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here tonight. We had a list of 6 questions that we could choose from to get started tonight, and I think I chose one of the more provocative ones to get us going. So I will read the question and then offer some thoughts. In a time when our political fabric is being pulled apart from all sides, the church's own fabric reflects these tensions. What responsibility do Catholic universities have to keep the church's fabric from tearing apart? And what active steps can universities take to ease these tensions? I'll read it one more time since we're on Zoom. In a time when our political fabric is being pulled apart from all sides, the church's own fabric reflects these tensions. What responsibility do Catholic universities have to keep the church's fabric from tearing apart? And what active steps can universities take to ease these tensions? I was pulling into the parking lot the other day, and the car in front of me had a bumper sticker on it that said, "Science is real, so is God." And I love that bumper sticker because I felt like it, you'd only see that at a Catholic school, at a place where we can believe in both science and God, and we should believe in both science and God. But to the question, what responsibilities do Catholic universities have to keep the fabric from tearing apart? I think Catholic universities have the responsibility to model how to disagree with deep love and deep respect, and how to speak with both conviction and humility, but also how to listen and even be changed by opposing viewpoints, or at the very least to learn from them. What does that mean concretely? I can think of a couple things that Catholic universities can do to help us achieve that aim. So one of the things we can do is to provide a historical perspective. I was talking to Chris Smith, who's a friend of the DeNicola Center and a fellow sociologist the other day, and he reminded me that if we can think about a historical perspective on polarization that puts our present in the context of the past, meaning there's never been a time in the history of the church where we haven't had conflict. There's never been a time when there weren't strong disagreements among the faithful over all kinds of issues. So it's helpful to look back so that we don't wrongly believe that we're in a truly unique situation and that this time the fabric may really tear apart. Conflict is built into the Catholic view of the development of doctrine and our readiness to rethink our beliefs in light of our developing human experience in new times. So I think our key isn't to avoid conflict, but it's how to have virtuous conflict. So I think that's the second thing we can do as a Catholic university, is we can help channel disagreements into productive discussions. We can try to enhance mutual understanding and maybe even advance insight. Now, that's a very academic answer to a situation that's often fraught with emotion and conviction and righteousness and stubbornness. And what I see a lot around the university and even around the nation is a lot of people figuratively throwing bombs at each other and not having that kind of virtuous disagreement. I think I see a lot of people talking at each other, being willing to get into the same room, but then not really listening to each other because they're so dug in on their own perspective and convinced that they're right. So that's what I'd like to see us do better. And that's what I'd like to see the Catholic universities do, is that we can model for the church how believers of the same faith with very different views can have productive conversations in which each person or each group seeks to listen, seeks to understand each other, to rise above incivility, to rely upon reason and evidence to engage with one another, and to deal with disagreements with deep respect for one another as brothers and sisters in the church. We can also model that for the nation as well, and not just for the church. How do patriots who love the same country but hold very different views, how can they have productive conversations in which each person or group seeks to listen and understand the other, rise above incivility, rely upon reason and evidence, and deal with disagreements with deep respect for one another as fellow citizens of the same country? I think if we could do that, we would be able to prevent further tearing of the fabric in the country and keep patriotism from turning into nationalism.
Thank you, Sarah. Marcus?
Yeah, I don't see how anyone could disagree with what Sarah just said. I think that that's an important responsibility of Catholic universities and of Catholic education. But I think I would go further. I think that what we're seeing right now is a failure of higher education generally to get students to think, not just think critically, but self-critically. And what I mean by that is that we've come to a point, particularly in our politics, where politics has become almost like a religion for a lot of people. And when it comes to our faith and our Catholicism, a lot of people attempt to shape their faith to match their politics rather than the other way around. And it's led to this dualistic thinking. In fact, there was a very interesting op-ed recently over the last couple of days by Father James Martin, the Jesuit priest and prolific author who talked about this. And it made me think that what a lot of us do when it comes to our faith is to we've already made pre-commitments to our political beliefs, and we try to shape our faith to those political beliefs, a lot like Judith Jarvis Thompson's trolley problem, right? So if you remember the trolley problem, you've got 5 people on the tracks in one direction, and if you don't divert the train to kill one person, it's going to kill the 5. And so we've gotten into this mindset where we've become devoted to one particular approach or solution to a problem rather than another. These commitments, to me, are misguided. And one of the things that we can do as educators is to get our students to recognize that life is much more complex than the trolley problem. There are not clear-cut answers that lead us to vote for Republicans or Democrats. There is innocent life to protect in the womb, but there's also innocent life to protect on the streets, and we need to find more complex solutions, and we need to be more self-critical when it comes to our political commitments and make sure that our politics isn't supplanting our faith. And I think that as Catholic universities, we can take a lead in introducing our students, not just to critical thinking, but to be self-critical as well.
Thank you. Tom, would you have anything to add?
Yeah, great comments. First of all, I want to say thanks to Carter for the invitation. I got to catch some of Carter and the great David Solomon earlier, and happy to be with my friend Anna again, and to share the stage with Marcus and Sarah here. A couple thoughts. I think we're in big trouble in our culture, and my big disappointment about our universities is that at best, we sort of reflect the problems of the culture, and at worst, I think we make them worse often by the way we conduct ourselves on campuses. I mean, it was striking to me. I remember a tweet from John Haidt during the Kavanaugh hearings, which now seems like it was 40 years ago. Yeah. But where he said, if you want to know why we're seeing the division we see today, and he put up a poll, survey results, of answer to the question, do you hate members of the other political party? And in the 1980s, this hovered in the low teens. And in the last 10 years, it's been bursting upward toward 50% of Americans who say, yes, I hate members of the political party that I'm not a member of. We also have very good survey data showing that it is the most politically informed people who get their opponents wrong when they're asked about their beliefs and the sources of their beliefs. These are striking civic animosity and ignorance amongst the most active and informed people in our culture. We're living, I think, in an age of ideological insanity in our culture. We're living at a time when Newton's law of an equal and opposite reaction politically, it's actually an opposite and exponentially higher reaction of each side to one another. What can we do about this? Well, I think that on our campuses, and this has been said by both Sarah and Marcus, we do have to teach self-criticism. We do have to teach rational disagreement. I think there are two virtues that need to be connected with that. You know, there are books, Ben Sass's book, Arthur Brooks's book on Love Your Enemies. These are important books. I think what's missing in some of the arguments about civility and where universities can really step in is that what we believe, particularly at Catholic universities, what we believe is that taking objections seriously to my position are important for my own pursuit of truth and for our communal pursuit of truth. Remember Bernard Williams in his book on truth and truthfulness some years ago said, you know, one of the virtues of truthfulness is accuracy, which is a passion for getting it right. And academics at our best in our fields exhibit that. I think we need to exhibit that more actively in the classroom, and we need to exhibit for our students a willingness to entertain quite seriously positions that are opposed to the ones that we hold, and have students see us doing that. And we need to invite students, we need to give them the sense of trust, the sense of hope, that they can relax for a moment about their ideological commitments and actually think about the issues and be drawn out into serious argument. The other thing, in addition to a commitment to truthfulness, I do think, and this runs all through Pope Francis's recent encyclical Fratelli Tutti, I think we need to think deeply about the virtue of solidarity and how we think about that in our communities, especially on campuses and around our campuses, and a sense of what we owe to one another out of what Aquinas calls misericordia or mercy, a sense of our being bound to one another in both the pursuit of truth and even more rooted in a kind of trustfulness and love. And those are hard things to do all at once, but I think this is the mission of a Catholic university, is to counter the kind of ideological insanity that dominates our culture, and to do so by giving students the freedom to pursue the truth in wonder and joy and friendship and in solidarity with one another.
Thank you, Tom. Marcus and Sarah, do you have any follow-ups? Can I ask a follow-up question myself then? I know that there are a lot of undergraduates who tune in who both attend this conference and who are tuning in tonight. And I guess I want to ask the kind of let's disagree together question, which is I find in the classroom that my students are too nervous about even saying what their deeply held convictions are. So there's a problem of politeness, and there's an inability to disagree from the get-go. So how do you even get them into the gate to vocalize their deeply held convictions? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, it does. And I think what we've lost is an atmosphere or environment of charity, that we are not giving people permission to express their true thoughts or their true feelings, because of a fear that there will be a violent response to it. And one of the things we can do at Catholic universities is create an environment and an atmosphere of charity, where we recognize that we are all part of the same environment, and that the same deference and latitude that we would want, that we would extend it to others. And I think that Catholic universities have an opportunity to make a unique contribution in that area, that a lot of the secular universities have failed to make.
Great, thank you, Marcus.
Yeah, so I'm glad Tom brought up Fratelli Tutti, because although I like all of the questions, and I think they're all important, I think that Tom's mention of Fratelli Tutti leads me to try to answer this question. The question is, this summer brought issues of racism in this country to the fore in a way not seen since the 1960s. How can Catholic universities respond to this pressing need in a distinctive way? So I'm old enough to remember the 60s, and I'm disappointed with what the events of last summer and the events of the last year have, and perhaps even the last 4 years, have revealed about our society and the position of race in our society. I think what it's revealed, much to my disappointment, is that we failed. We have failed when it comes to addressing issues of racism. We've basically put a Band-Aid on it. And I've been in discussions with my colleagues, Carter, among others, about both what is it about the approaches that have been taken that have failed, and how can Catholic universities respond in a distinctive way. And as I think about it, I think what is at the core of our faith, of Catholicism? And at the core of our faith is a belief that each of us is made in the image and likeness of God, and that we should strive to see each other the way God sees us. God sees each of us. And I think what flows from this is that it starts to reveal the real failure of how we've addressed racism in this country over the last 30 or 40, 50, 60 years, since I was a kid. And that is that we've combated racism in an anti-Catholic way. We've combated racism with more racism. In other words, we see the problem and we think the solution to the problem is to treat everyone categorically and take people and treat them as placeholders for a race or an ethnicity or a gender. And that has not brought us any progress. The idea of each of us being created in the image and likeness of God means that at our core, we are not Black or white or Asian. We are at our core individuals. And to the extent that we fail to treat each of us as individuals, if we treat people as placeholders for a particular race, then we are only putting a Band-Aid over a deeper problem, because we are failing to interact with people as individuals, as creatures of God, who are created in the image and likeness of God. We are doing something that is antithetical to our Catholicism, to our faith. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to correct it. And I think one of the ways we can correct it at Catholic universities is to reject the secular Band-Aid approach to racism, and start to treat people like individuals with all of the various characteristics that they have that we ought to value. That real diversity involves valuing people of different races, different cultures, but also of different talents, different backgrounds. And if we fail to do that, then we can't expect progress from others. This is an area in which we as Catholics, and as Catholic universities in particular, ought to be leading the rest of our society.
Thank you, Marcus. Tom, would you like to get anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say more than what Marcus just did. You know, I've been thinking a lot about, and started last summer with a conversation series that I set up, did one with Bishop Barron, and then with my good friend and fellow UD alum, Bishop Flores from Brownsville, trying to help us in the church develop a language for thinking about these things that's authentically Catholic. And I think one of the things that Marcus highlighted is the emphasis upon unity, but our ability to take difference within unity seriously. I mean, I think of the foundation of the church at Pentecost, right? With the disciples going out and preaching, and everybody hearing the one truth of the gospel in their own individual language. And then I think of the vision of heaven in Revelation. I see a people of every nation, race, and tongue, right? This sense of unity of a diverse sets of people. I also think in the wider culture, we've got a language of justice that is disconnected from mercy. Now, of course, we don't want to shortchange justice and have cheap forgiveness. But if justice is completely separated from mercy, that's heretical in the Catholic view, right? So connecting justice with mercy, we have conceptions of dignity that are floating free from any sort of foundation whatsoever, both in the language that Marcus was using about being created in the image and likeness of God, and in the natural law tradition. We have a basis for thinking about the grounding of dignity, and the grounding of dignity, not just in souls, but in our embodiment, as Carter is emphasizing in his most recent book. So I think we have been too shy to talk about these issues and take them seriously, but we've also been too, and maybe there's other motives than shyness involved there too, but we have certainly been too shy to invoke the richness of our traditions and of our language and of our the depth of our theology to contribute to these contemporary discussions. And I think we'd find, if we did that we would be connecting up with an older civil rights movement of Martin Luther King and others that was very much rooted in notions that are very akin to Catholic social thought.
Thank you, Tom. Sarah, final word on this question?
It's hard to add to what both of them said, but I will. But I'll try. I was thinking when I read this question about how Jesus's message is both particular and universal, and I was thinking about how Jesus was born in a particular time, in a particular country, in a particular ethnicity, to a particular family of modest means, in a particular religious context, and so forth, under a particular ruler. And throughout Jesus's life and ministry, of course, he tried to reach across boundaries of sex, of ethnicity. We all know the stories, the women at the well and all the rest. But if we think about the first generation of Christians and how they struggled with kind of how to take the particular and, translate that into the universal gospel, I think, you can especially see it through Paul's letters, and it culminates in the line that God has no favorites. And I think about that, in terms of the themes of the particular and the universal, that that we realize the universal in the particular. And so you can't say that you love God if you don't love the person in front of you, right? So so I think that, you know, what that means is that if we don't love each other, you know, kind of equally, if we don't, as Marcus said, like see through the categories, then we're not truly loving God. And I agree with what Tom said, you know, about dignity, that we have a framework for this. We have a framework for how to do it, which also means, I believe, what Marcus said, that we have failed to do this as a church. And if you go back through church documents, you could find teachings about discrimination and about racism back decades. You know, John Paul II wrote about it. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops have written about it. And so the fact that it's in all those documents, it's in all those teachings, you know, it goes back to scripture, yet it's not a part of our, you know, what we talk about on a daily basis and what we teach about and what we emphasize in the church. I think that's, you know, where we as a Catholic university can really make a difference, is to make sure that we bring that to the fore, that we're talking about it all the time, that we're teaching about it all the time, and that we're really emphasizing the message that unless you love everybody, you don't love God.
So let me add one more thing, if I may. Sarah's referenced it to the whole history of this problem. Just brought an image to my mind from what Tom said. You know, Tom mentioned the Pentecost and the apostles speaking in languages and being understood by everyone to whom they encounter. And it's the same message, but they can all understand. And juxtapose that against the Tower of Babel, where they're all speaking different languages and can't understand them. So I think what I'm saying is that the secular approach, the Tower of Babel approach, has failed, and the Catholic Church, the Catholic approach, where we see each other as individuals made in the image of likeness of God, that's the Pentecost, right? That's where we have a spirit-filled approach toward others that Sarah was just talking about.
Thank you, Marcus. Tom, would you like to take a question out of the hat?
Yeah, so I want to make a point about something that's in a book. So you asked that one of the questions we had was, what book would you recommend to students at Catholic universities to read this year? And you know, a book that's really impressed me and I think is really relevant to the obstacles to education for young people today, and something that we're facing. Matt Crawford, an essayist and author and daytime motorcycle repair guy, you know, famous for the essay shop class as Soulcraft, which then became a book. And one of his, I think he's written a book on self-driving cars and safetyism most recently, but the one before that, it's called The World Beyond Your Head, on Becoming an Individual in an Age of Distraction. And, you know, one of the things that I think a lot about at all the institutions I've been at, especially at Baylor and now at the University of Dallas, and especially for our really high achieving students, is the question of resilience. And you know, when we do these recruitment events for really high caliber students, and you have a kind of panel of faculty, it's funny, they're very intense. They're goal driven. They've got much better study habits than I ever did at their age. But they're all, when they ask questions, it's all a version of, how do I come here and make sure that I'm going to succeed? Right. And so I would always interrupt when we were doing these panel discussions at Baylor and say, you know what, the thing you're going to have to do is to fail and bounce back from it. And you can see their little heads moving. Next Tuesday, I will fail and I will bounce back from it. But of course, that's not the kind of failure we're talking about. It's not something you can plan. It's got to be the kind of thing that hits you upside your head when you're not expecting it and really makes you doubt whether you can go on. And how do they develop that kind of resilience? There's a great image that Crawford uses, and he uses Freud effectively, I think, to say that Freud's notion that for young people, there's the pleasure principle, And then for adults, there's the reality principle. And becoming an adult is about learning to navigate the reality principle, the way in which the world and other people push back on my will, right? And here's the image from Crawford that I love. He says that the world of social media and the world of screens that almost all young people have been brought up in, he says this gives them the illusion, and us to the extent that we participate in it heavily, of a frictionless universe, right? A universe where nothing pushes back. I don't like this conversation, I move to this group. I don't like these images, I move to these images for as long as I want or don't want. I can come on screens, the plasticity of the way in which I interact with the external world gives me the illusion of a frictionless universe. This is the illusion of having extended adolescence, right? Or extended childhood, of pursuing the pleasure principle without having to confront the reality principle, the way in which the external world and other people's wills are going to push back against mine. So everybody who pushes back against my will is, as a group, haters, right? Whether they are actual haters or not, just because they disagree with my opinions. So what we need to do is to train students to live in a universe of fiction, of friction, and to enjoy it, right? Not just to experience it as painful, but to experience the navigation of the reality of people and of things as something that we don't just try to navigate to get around to get what we want, but that we actually enjoy interacting with in ways that develop our will and develop our character for fortitude and prudence, and in the end, resilience, so that we're used to things pushing back and others pushing back. And we actually take delight in the way, in most cases, we can respond to that and grow from it. So I love that image from Crawford's book that he develops at length of a frictionless universe versus a universe where friction is all around us, but we learn to navigate it in adult ways. And we learn that this is part of what it makes it enjoyable to be a virtuous adult.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, it's the favorite book question, or the book you'd recommend undergraduates read this year. Sarah, how about you? Oh, Sarah, you're on mute.
Okay, let Marcus go, and I'm going to see if I can pull it off the shelf.
Oh, sure. Marcus?
Okay, so I'm not going to recommend one. I'm going to recommend three.
Oh, man.
The first one is very quick. So first, I'm not going to bite the hand that feeds me. I've got to recommend Carter Snead's book, What It Means to Be Human. It is a really important book, and you can see, once you get into it, you can see why the Wall Street Journal has listed it as one of the 10 most important books of the year. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Carter for his book. But two other books go to what I was talking about thinking about educating students to be both critical and self-critical. And the two other books are a little bit older, but I think they're important because they show the breadth of Catholic thought. The first one would be Michael Novak's Business as a Calling, where he demonstrates the social Catholic teaching foundations of going out and getting a job and working and doing your part to shoulder your place in the economy, and that it's important for each of us to do that. But a lot of people who read that might think of it as a defense of capitalism, a Catholic defense of capitalism. But I want to position that against another book by Reverend James Martin, who's one of my favorite authors. He's a Jesuit priest. He has a new book coming out called Learning to Pray, but it's not quite out yet. But an older book that he has is called The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. And people think of him as a more liberal Catholic thinker. But the reason why I recommend these two books together is to demonstrate that there is no one way to be Catholic. There's no one way to think as a Catholic, and that that being Catholic and Catholic education and Catholic social thought is much more complex than the way it's been simplified in our political life. And so it's hard for me to recommend just one book, because I think to be truly educated, you want to introduce students to ideas that are often in conflict with each other. So those are my three.
Thanks. Sorry, go ahead, Ms.
Yes, I will recommend just one because it's really long. And if we're talking about recommending something to undergrads, this is about all I could suggest. It's a book called Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 550 pages. It is a history of racism that just goes, as the title suggests, goes back to the beginning and writes about, I was somebody that thought I was rather educated on these issues. I study race in my work, but I was blown away by reading about how far back in history it goes and all the different institutions that kind of cultivated it, and to what end, and what the motives were for, and how it got perpetuated. There are some, the author who wrote it is a faculty member. He was at American University when he wrote it. Now I think he's at Boston University, and he is a historian. And I think he was in American Studies department. But the work was criticized some by historians for some of his techniques and methods, and for what he included and what he didn't include. But at the same time, it won a National Book Award, and I thought it was just an amazing book, and I really learned a lot from it. So I think that, particularly, given the time, given the moment, it's just a great work for students, I think, to really, to really learn how entrenched in society and in the world that racism is, and to really learn about the history of it. I think it's really eye-opening.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So now I'd like to turn to some questions from the audience, our virtual audience. I'm going to read the question twice, as Sarah did, so that it gives you a chance to listen, and then any of you can really jump in, okay? So Spencer, who's an undergraduate Soren Fellow of the De Nicola Center, asks, what are the most difficult challenges in remaining an authentically Catholic university while engaging with a culture increasingly unfamiliar and at times combative with respect to the values of religious faith? With this in mind, what do you think the future of higher Catholic education is? Okay, let me read it again. It's a good one. Spencer asks, what are the most difficult challenges in remaining an authentically Catholic university while engaging with a culture increasingly unfamiliar and at times combative with respect to the values of religious faith? With this in mind, what do you think the future of higher Catholic education is? So anybody jump in.
Well, I think I'll jump in on this because Sarah and I talk about this a lot. I think that one of the most difficult things about being in a Catholic university and maintaining excellence in a Catholic university is getting buy-in on the Catholic mission. Sarah and I think, both agree that at Notre Dame, we are able to get scholars who would otherwise go to higher ranked universities, but come to Notre Dame because of the Catholic mission, and are dedicated to those shared values. But at the same time, at a Catholic university, you're going to have lots of scholars who are steeped in the secular environments of their field and are not going to identify with the Catholic mission and those Catholic values, and want the university to be more like secular universities. They think that what's holding the Catholic university back is all of this Catholic stuff, when in fact, I believe it's the opposite. It's that our opportunity for excellence is embrace the shared values of the Catholic mission. But I think it's a constant struggle, and it's it's a struggle that makes you realize why there are so many universities that were originally founded as faith-based universities: Northwestern, Duke, Vanderbilt, Stanford, even were based, were faith-based, founded on various faiths, but have abandoned those faith-based values that were at the core of their founding, because it's hard. It's hard to get people to realize what's important about what we do, and it's hard to get people to reject the values of the world and the other scholars in the fields in which they participate. So it's a constant struggle, but if we don't maintain that struggle, if we don't fight against those secular pressures, we're going to lose what's truly great and distinctive about the contribution that only a Catholic university can make to the world.
Great. So since we've got several questions in the queue, I think given that our sunset is closing in the next half hour, I'm just going to have one person answer a student question, then we'll move on to the next one, okay? Just because I'd like to get as many participants around our post-dinner conversation as possible. So Allison Cox, who's a 2L at Notre Dame Law School and a Sorin Fellow, asks, I've enjoyed my time at Notre Dame so much, in part because it is a place where diverse political and religious beliefs are common and present among friend groups. What is your advice for students leaving campus for creating such communities and open dialogue post-campus life? Let me read it one more time. Allison Cox asks, I've enjoyed my time at Notre Dame so much, in part because it is a place where diverse political and religious beliefs are common and present among friend groups. What is your advice for students leaving campus for creating such communities and open dialogue post-campus life? This is a really important question. Anybody?
Well, since I know Allie and I really admire her, I think I'll go ahead and answer her question here. I think that what she has to do out in the real world is what she has done here, which is get to know people as individuals at their core. Don't put people in categories. And as they get to know you, they won't put you in boxes either. And that's how you start to build your communities. And once you build communities of trust, it's within those communities of trust that you can freely express yourself. I think part of the problem right now is that we have tremendous distrust throughout our culture, and it's very hard to have free expression where you don't trust the people around you. So that would be my advice.
Anna, can I just quickly follow up on that? I wanted to let a Notre Dame person respond to a Notre Dame question about how to replicate the community there by the Golden Dome. You know, one of the things that I try to encourage students to do while they're here, and I think they can, I did it both at Baylor and here at UD, is to certainly you're going to have friends that are who agree with you if you're practicing your faith and so forth, but seek out and make friends with people who disagree with you, and they help keep you honest. And it's also, there's a different kind of friendship there, I think, often with people with whom we have significant disagreements. But those are really important in this time, I think, to have a genuine community that's different from, you know, what C.S. Lewis warns us about in The Inner Ring, where we're all trying to replicate and feel a deep sense of belonging and affirmation of our views, to spread out those friendships so that you actively seek out friends among those who disagree with you about important things.
Okay, wait, let me just jump in with one more thing.
Go.
The other thing is, I think, to be confident in your own faith. When I started my first job out of graduate school, I was in a department where people were really surprised to have a person of faith there, because atheism and being agnostic were very common. And there was a particular coworker who used to stop by my office all the time and say, you know, that stuff in the Bible, like it's not real, right? And he would kind of challenge me and he would prod me. but I never got offended by it. I didn't take it personally. Like I respected that he was an atheist. And I think at the end of the day, he respected that I was a Catholic and just wanted to engage in conversation about it. And so I think, kind of having a little bit of a thick skin and being confident in your own beliefs and being willing to engage in challenging conversation, I think it will help.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So this question really dovetails about what you've all already been talking about. So this will just give you time to continue your conversation. A participant asks, this has been a wonderful discussion about creating an environment for engaging rational disagreement. At a Catholic institution, how do you balance the need to consider opposing viewpoints while boldly living the faith and drawing people into the light of Christ and the truths we hold? Let me read it one more time. This has been a wonderful discussion about creating an environment for engaging rational disagreement. At a Catholic university, how do you balance the need to consider opposing viewpoints while boldly living the faith and drawing people into the light of Christ and the truths we hold?
So I'm happy to offer an initial response to that. I think and I think we have trouble doing this today. I think there's got to be a sense of confidence in the liturgical life, in the student affairs on campus, and in how you articulate your mission, how it's embodied in your curriculum, how it's reflected in your faculty. But that should also be a kind of, there should also be built in there a Catholic openness to reason and to disagreement. I mean, one of the most remarkable things about Aquinas is the way in which he just seems endlessly to multiply objections to his own view, and his utter confidence, it just seems so natural to him that that's what you would do, that you would start out asking a question and then saying, oh, here are all the things that line up against what I'm going to say. I think there ought to be a kind of confidence in that. But there's also got to be a welcoming of people who are not of the faith, who want to be part of this. I spent 16 years at Baylor University. I think I was the first Catholic in higher administration there. And certainly when you're in a different culture, I went from Boston to Waco and Boston College to Baylor. There's some awkwardness, and even some cases where I thought, wow, that's a kind of ignorant statement about Catholicism. But I always wanted Baylor to be a great Baptist university. It didn't seem to me that it would be good for Baylor to be a kind of watered down ecumenical Christian university, even though I was happy that Baylor wanted Catholics and other non-Baptists on the faculty and in the student body, and Catholics flourish there. It just seemed to me that it was important, despite moments of awkwardness and maybe even prejudicial comments from people who didn't understand what they're saying occasionally. It seemed to me is really important for Baylor to remain a Baptist university, and for me as a Catholic to respect and encourage that. And I think the same ought to be true at Catholic or Orthodox or Jewish or Muslim institutions.
Would anybody else like to chime in before I move on?
Yeah, I would. I think that the way I hear that question is it makes me think about when we have a speaker on campus or an event that people deem to be not consistent with our Catholic identity or with church teaching. And a lot of times people can get very upset about that. And how can we be projecting the faith and inviting these, kind of people to campus? And I think that it's very important for our beliefs to be challenged. And it's very important for our beliefs to hear opposing viewpoints. And it's very important to not, for the university not to be an echo chamber. We're a Catholic university, which means we can talk about anything here. We can talk about science, and we can talk about faith, and we can talk about, anything we want here, short of hate speech. And so we should welcome those opposing viewpoints, even if we don't think they're consistent with church teaching, so that we can understand how other people see the issue and why they feel the way they do, and have our own feeling on the issue be informed by it. And we are secure enough in who we are as Catholics at Notre Dame that shouldn't be such a threatening thing to have those opposing viewpoints. They don't threaten us because we are strong in what we believe. But it's very important to hear it and to learn from it as part of being a university.
Thank you, Sarah. So this will be the last question that we take from the participants. And then I'll be asking each of you if you have like any closing comments, anything that you came with you tonight that you wanted to talk about that you haven't had a chance to talk about yet. Okay, so this is Joshua Gilchrist, who's an undergraduate Soren Fellow at the De Nicola Center. He asks, from your perspective, what is the role of the Catholic University in reaching beyond its own community intellectually and striving for the renewal of the minds of all people? In other words, beyond the betterment of society promoted through research that aids the corporal works of mercy, how can the Catholic University reach out to the public and minister to people spiritually and proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ in the world? I'll read it one more time. Joshua asks, from your perspective, what is the role of the Catholic University in reaching beyond its own community intellectually and striving for the renewal of the minds of all people? In other words, beyond the betterment of society promoted through research that aids the corporal works of mercy, how can the Catholic University reach out to the public and minister to people spiritually and proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world? That's tough because it's a question that's a challenge to all of us. It's
Yeah. I mean, I don't have an adequate answer to that question. It strikes me that the university is going to be mostly about activities that are internal to the university, although those can be ordered through service and research and so forth to other communities. And I think it's through those activities, but also through the way in which we form students who are able to go out in whatever discipline they're living in, working in, and bring the gospel in that way. I mean, you could think about projects that universities have engaged in that involve research, mission, service, but I'm not sure if that answers the question as formulated.
right.
So I want to take a stab at it because I think what came to mind for me was one of the projects that we have underway in the law school, which is our Religious Liberty Initiative. So one of the recent, so we have a Religious Liberty Initiative that has at its core a religious liberty clinic that takes on cases where religious liberty is challenged around the country and around the world. And recently we had a case against the governor of New York that went all the way up to the Supreme Court that we won. And one of my colleagues remarked about that case. What's really interesting about that case is it was led by a lawyer who is an LDS, Latter-day Saints church member, who supervised Catholic students and other students at a Catholic university representing Muslim clients who were standing up to defend the religious freedom rights of Orthodox Jews in New York. Only in America could something like that happen. But that's the kind of thing I think a Catholic university can do, is show that there are certain core principles and values that are of benefit to everyone. And we don't have to limit ourselves to our own faith circles when it comes to taking action in the world as a university. And I think that applies to research, scholarship, as well as teaching, that when we're striving for excellence, we can be inclusive.
Thank you. Marcus, anybody else? Okay, so we're almost out of time, and I thought I would give each of the panelists, though, an opportunity at the end of the evening to just talk about anything that you wanted to talk about that you think is important for the participants who are listening this year, watching from all over to the Notre Dame Ethics and Culture Conference about what we owe to each other.
You know, Anna, when I was thinking about that phrase, what we owe to each other, and for higher education, I was thinking about Hannah Arendt's wonderful essays in Between Past and Future, where she talks about the crisis in education. And there she says, you know, what adults owe to children is to stand up in front of them and say to them, these are things in the world that matter. These are things that you need to give your attention, your intelligence, your devotion to. We can't absolutely determine what conclusions you'll come to about these, but these questions, these books, these lines of investigation matter. And she argues that for adults to abdicate that is a form of child abandonment, to leave children on their own, to simply make their way in the world without any guidance about what from the past is important for them to reckon with, doesn't determine that they're going to agree with everything from the past. How could they? The books we read from the past disagree with one another quite vehemently. But it is the responsibility of every educational institution, and especially a Catholic one, to have substantive commitments about what education is for and what its content ought to be. And I think if we shirk that, we are engaging in a form of child abandonment that is a failure of us as adults, as educators, and as Catholics.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else?
I guess I was thinking in terms of our responsibility to each other, what always comes to my mind is the Beatitudes, and thinking about the role of the university. In the third part of the Catechism states that the Beatitudes express our vocation, our end purpose. And it goes on to state that the Beatitudes respond to the natural desire for happiness through reason and free will. So Catholic education has a responsibility to provide an intellectual framework for students and for all of us to articulate and to appreciate that the ultimate end of human beings' happiness and actions is also pursued by God's law and grace.
Thank you, Sarah. Marcus, any closing words to the closing words?
Yeah, I'm glad that Sarah mentioned the Beatitudes. She's heard me say before that that the reason why I came here is that I really believe that Catholic education has to answer the call of God, and in particular, God's call in Matthew 25. God tells us what we should be doing, what we owe to each other. In Matthew 25, he says to us, "When I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. I was naked and you clothed me, and I was in prison and you visited me." That's what we owe to each other. We owe obedience to God's command in Matthew 25. Not just to feed, but to feed excellently. Not just to clothe, but to clothe excellently. We as Catholic educators can achieve excellence. We don't have to mirror secular universities. I love Northwestern, I love NYU, but the world doesn't need another Northwestern or another NYU. The world needs Notre Dame. And to the extent that we can preserve it, the world will be a better place.
Thank you, Marcus. So on behalf of the three panelists, on behalf of the organizers of this conference, Notre Dame Ethics and Culture Conference, I want to thank each of the participants who've tuned in this evening. This theme of this year, who knew it was going to be as prescient as it is, what we owe to each other. You've taken that question seriously by joining the conversation this evening, and so we thank you. The conference is not over, however. It will resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. You can use the same Zoom webinar link for all sessions. And if you'd like more information about the complete schedule, you can go to the DeNicola Center's website, the ethicscenter.nd.edu. It's very easy to find. You all navigate the web very, very well. So thank you very much to the three panelists on behalf of everyone who's tuned in. Thank you for giving up your time. We know how busy you are, and we'll see you soon, hopefully, put in a post-COVID world.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Anna.